Writers, readers, drinkers, lend me your ears and your livers. Welcome to Writers Drinking Whiskey Open Bar, your boozy author panel. The show where every bottle gets killed, but their stories get told for many millennia to come. I am your host who listens to every bottle right down the last drop, William R. Hincy. And joining me today, I got a really stellar panel with Jesse Darnay, Gaby Loreno, and Dario Cheriello. Everybody, welcome to the bar.
Hi. Hello.
Awesome. So, and as the normal theme of the show, the bios will be down here in the little description. So you want to see everyone's resumes and all the amazing things they've done. It'll be down there. But we like to have some fun with it. So I'm going to ask, and I'll start just to introduce the game because sometimes I have this great idea for a game and no one understands it. As Dario well knows from doing this before, I was like, what is he thinking? So I'll start, but the game is you're stranded on a desert island. You get to take one book, one adult beverage, and one writer of your choosing. That writer can be alive or dead. Doesn't have to be anyone living. I mean, you can assume they're living in this hypothetical world. So what are you taking? So I'll start just to get us rolling. Then Gaby will go to you. So I think writer. I think I would take a poet, just because you need someone that can look at the mundane things or things you see commonly and make them new in some way. And I've always Keats is great at that, but I'm thinking Emily Dickinson, just because in the old pictures she also looks really stern, and that makes me feel at home. That's how I'm used to looking on the other side of the bed and my wife giving me that Emily Dickinson stare. So I think I'd go Dickinson. A beverage would be obvious. I'd have my old fashioned with me. It's simple, to the point, and strong. And book. I should have thought of this beforehand. This is going to be strange for me to say. I think I would take the Bible. For a couple of reasons. One is it's got a billion stories in there, and you can kind of read into them forever. There's a lot of things you can take from it. But also, they say everyone gets religious on their deathbed. And since I'm not handy or very good at survival, I'm going to be getting to my deathbed very quickly on this hypothetical island. So I'm going to need to redeem my soul. So I think I would take the Bible. So let's move on. Gaby, what about you?
I would invite George Harrison, who is a writer in addition to a musician.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that I could figure out a way to fashion some coconuts into a ukulele. And I would take a ukulele songbook.
Oh, very cool.
We could play ukulele. And I would have access to his mystical knowledge in addition to his musical genius. And also get to spend time with a Beatle, which who doesn't want that?
Mm-hmm.
For my beverage of choice, I'm going to go back to my teenage years. And I'm going to say I would like an assortment of hot teas and rum to put in them. when you don't need a toddy sometimes, right?
Right. I love the fashioning the ukulele it's a 3-hour tour. It's Gilligan's Island, right? The ukulele and George Harrison as the professor. You can make a Mary Ann. I believe it completely. So.
I'll try. I mean,
out of the coconuts.
Awesome. So Dario, you want to take it from there?
Yeah, this is always difficult. I think writer, and I've harped on him before. I think it would have to be Mark Twain. I just think he'd be great company because he's funny. He's got an attitude. He never shuts up. He'd be all right, and he'd keep me real. And stop me going to the bad place or getting too serious.
Right.
So I think he'd be good. Books, man, that is so hard. You mentioned taking a poet along, and I can think of some poetry collections, especially my major British poets, that might be the thing. But that's such a hard one. I mean, some days I might say King's The Stand, just because it's so damn long and there's so much in it. It's got to be a long book. Lord of the Rings, maybe, because not only is it long, but his English is just so damn good. And what was the other thing? Beverage?
Beverage, yep.
It would have to be red wine. It's just about the only thing other than water that I could stand to drink every day and not get tired of.
Right. Yeah, that's the Italian heritage coming out right there. It's like, of course, it's red wine.
And I'm hoping I can get the coconut juice to ferment too, so I might have some, some extra options there.
You can't be wrong. I did my research.
Very good. Very good. Awesome. Thanks for that. You want to take it from there, Jesse?
Yeah, well, I'm kind of going while I respect that so much, I'm kind of going in the opposite direction. I would probably take Virginia Woolf with me because she's, to me, so enigmatic and was such a powerful person. I feel like I would never tire of just exploring the mystical qualities of life with her endlessly. And then for a drink, probably a Paloma, a grapefruit and tequila, so I can pretend like I'm not on a desert island. Like wake up, refreshed, because I would drink it first thing in the morning. And then a poet, kind of similar to what you were saying, William. One of my favorite poets is Hart Crane. Because he's just so, his lines are so dense and you can just go through his poems over and over and over. And every time you do, you're getting something new out of it. So I feel like I could just play with those ideas and have them tossed around in my brain until
sorry, who was that, Jesse? I missed
Hart Crane, Hart. He was around, I want to say the beginning of the 20th century. Just this really kind of, again, like enigmatic, mystical poet. But yeah, I'll send you some of his stuff.
Thank you.
Phenomenal. But like his poems are like puzzles. You read them the first time and it's like, wait, what happened? Something happened. I got to figure this out. And then you go back, and you go back. More and more gets revealed. I mean, it annoys some people, but I love it. I love the mental game.
Right. Well, I believe it. I mean, on the show you were on, you were like waxing poetic about James Joyce. So God. James Joyce and Harp there could just, or Hart could just go to town.
Forgive me, James, for not taking you. That's, he's number two.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Awesome. Well, thanks for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. So round one here. First question of the day. Getting to writing rules here, right? Or technique, but there's the old saying, kill your darlings. And I think the basic premise is, right, you have that beautiful piece, of prose, probably more prose than poetry. I think that statement goes by, but you have this beautiful little poetic line, but maybe it's impacting flow or something. So I guess the first part would be, do you agree with the axiom of killing your darlings, as like painful as it sounds? And if not, how do you deal with it? Like, how do you actually include them in a way that doesn't kind of overwhelm the story or maybe hinder the story you're trying to tell? So maybe then we'll just start again. Let me switch orders here for my screen. Okay, Dario, let's tag you in. You want to start us?
Sure. Writing rules are so hard and obnoxious. I mean, my reflexive answer to any question about writing rules is it depends. That applies to everything. I should wear it on a sign around my neck. And I think the problem is that, the experienced writer doesn't need the rule or the advice, and the neophyte writer is going to misunderstand it 90% of the time and follow it blindly or wrongly. I can't remember who it was. Was it, his name will come to me, who said, if it sounds like writing, I rewrite it. Well, that's all well and fine, but sometimes you turn out a piece of good prose, and in the right place, it can shine. I think it's a matter of placement more than anything, even if it's a slight digression or not directly relevant. And if you're writing a a novel, you've got room to digress. I'm a stylist. I like well-turned language, and I see no reason to excise it unless it's really doing harm. So I think there's a lot of things to look at before you look at a piece of well-turned prose if you're looking for cuts. Sometimes it's just a nice little gift to the reader.
Sure. Well,
That's
and
about
I've always thought it was a little bit of a strange rule, being that it's a language medium, right? So the idea to, I almost think it's a reflection on movies, like cinema getting so big of the day. It's like, no, just be the camera that observes everything, right?
Yeah,
and don't get into it. And so I've always thought it was a bit strange from just that perspective. So why would you? The flip side, though, I do get, because especially like I write literary fiction, at times and things anyways. And a lot of my work is, classified as literary, and literary writers can go very much like on a high horse and they're just blathering drunkenly off. And you sometimes it's fun. Sometimes you're just like, where in the world are we? What is happening now? I forget who's talking, what story this is, like where we are. So I think your point about placement is a good one. Is I think the discretion on when to do it too is, you don't have to, every time someone goes to get a sip of water, you don't have to, his parched mouth was, what I mean? Like, doesn't need 97 adjectives and a beautiful turn of phrase for every little thing that happens in the story. So it is interesting from there. So Jesse, you want to maybe take us from there?
Yeah, I'm glad you came to me, because I think that's great, right? It can fit somewhere. Maybe if it doesn't fit in this particular scene or moment, it can fit somewhere else. And also I feel like it can fit in other spaces, right? Like I tweet, I post different things in different places. Like, so what I try to do is, like, if I take something out, I keep it somewhere, because I know I'll use it somewhere, either in, later on in this work or some other space. But I think what changed for me is that when I, was a younger writer, I just couldn't let anything go. I thought that, every single sentence, like, I know what this means. This is so beautiful. Like, you have to love this. And if you don't, there's something wrong with you,
Right.
So I think I've definitely seen myself change over time. Now I'm just very quick to, like, no, that doesn't work. Yep. You've written something like that before. Okay, it's great. We'll just put it over here. So I've become a lot more, I don't know what the word is. Like, I want to say distant, but that implies, like, I don't care. More, less attached, I guess. I don't know. I'm not.
Well, I think there's the discernment, right? You're just more discerning, I think. Like, it's like you can understand, like, you know what I mean? Like, they're not. The whole thing is your darling, not the individual sentences.
Exactly,
so it's
it's all in service of this greater project. So I really like what Dario had to say about taking it out, and it can fit in different places. It's not like a hard and fast thing. Like, oh no, this doesn't work. It has to go. Right. You're also, like, as you're writing, you're kind of getting into a style and getting into a voice, and I feel like things like that come up for a reason as part of the project. So most likely there could be a place for it. Right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I love what you said there too, because that's one thing I started doing. I don't know when, but I have a file. Every time I'm writing something, I have the file I'm working on, and then I have a cuts file.
Yeah, exactly. Me too. Mm-hmm.
So it's just like, it's never really abandoned. It's just like, it's at a foster home, and the ones that I think are really good, like, kind of put in a certain thing, and you can find a place later, or maybe it is just a tweet. Maybe it's, maybe it goes nowhere. Maybe it inspires another story at some point, right? It might be that little thing, and you might look at it later and go, oh, I have this, this poem, this short story I want to write based on that. So I think that's a brilliant idea.
But kill your darlings, I guess, is like a hard, I guess it's like a good guide point, right? Like, don't become so attached to everything. If it doesn't work, you take. But I agree also with Dario that, rules are tricky. Maybe in the beginning it's good to have some guideposts as you're learning. Actually, you really, I feel like when I read things, I can tell very quickly if what I'm reading, is trying to adhere to all these specific rules, or if it's kind of someone's free voice. And obviously there's someone's free voice. And so I think rules are, maybe keep them in the back of your mind, but also, like, experiment and try to be yourself. And, you know, we're all different. We're all weird, right? And I want to know the weird you. I don't want to know. I don't want to know the, you know, the you who's like putting on a suit and tie and presenting yourself to me.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, and that's perfect. And the reason I put these together is the next question is going to be about voice and things, and I think they kind of go hand in hand a little bit. So that's great. You already kind of led us there. Gaby, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I very much ascribe to either taking it to the end of the work or end of the chapter. If it doesn't belong where you have it, maybe it can come somewhere else, and then you can always offload it onto a reference page. I do journalism work, so I'm going to have like a whole transcript of conversations with people. I'm not going to use everything that they say, but I find that it's very helpful, especially if I ever have to go back and look at something again, to just have all that information. And then I can refer to it, and then I can use it for whatever I need. So, I mean, it's not really killing them. It's really just coming up with a priority of what's the best way to say this right now in this particular passage. And then what did I write that I really love so much that doesn't exactly belong here? Put it on the reference sheet. This might come up again. You know, I do. I dig through stuff that's a couple years old. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I remember talking to that guy. Oh, I wonder if he could say anything in this article. You know, never know.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe it's, you know, allow your darlings to move around, not kill your darlings.
Freedom.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes you let your darlings be free, right? Don't put them away. I think there's a couple things I think about, you know, with it. Because the top three things I think with it is, one is try to make them critical to the text. Right. So it's just a flowery piece of prose that maybe is not benefiting something. But if you can make that flowery piece of prose mean something to the character, the greater story, add some nuance, you know, to the setting, whatever it might be. So like there's someone had mentioned it to me the other day. There's a short story. I know Jesse and Dario, of course, you guys have read the collection Without Expiration, but there's Left Us. Thank you so much. But there's a story, Left to Soak, and the old lady, she's in the hospital and she's on her way home, and she's really just pissed because she knows like her husband hasn't done the dishes, right? And so she looks at the swaying grasses, and lots of times the swaying grasses, that's a sign of freedom, right? You think, oh, the horse is going to things, and all she thinks about is how rooted they are. And then I'm going to paraphrase myself badly, but it's, and I think, did I note it down here? Yeah. So like, it's basically like they're rooted in place. They can't move. They're not free, and they're swaying, they're stretching just for that moment, that feeling of freedom. Because she feels like she's lost that too. Like she's rooted and she's just desperate for it. Right. So, it's a beautiful little line, if I say so myself, but the person had said so, like little review or whatever they wrote for it. They pointed that one out, you know, specifically. And it's just one line on her way home. It's a sentence, it's a little paragraph, two sentences, one just kind of putting her in the car, you know, traveling. And it gets down deeper into what her character is. And enlivens it, you know, for the reader. So I think like if you can wiggle it in to where it's critical to the story, because it's almost like when you do that, you're shining a spotlight, you know, on something. So what are you spotlighting? And you can do that with language in kind of beautiful ways. And I think that's the other point, is really think about pacing, especially literary writers. I think it's you can do that. You can have these really great little diatribes kind of, you know, going on. And I love them. I've certainly written them and had to cut back, you know, on them. But kind of consider the pacing of what you're writing and how it fits in. And the other one, it was funny. There's a gentleman show. When are we airing this one? May. Probably won't show by the time this one releases, but I'll try to put it up here in the little YouTube box when it goes. Keir Graff was on the show, and a brilliant writer. And he was like, a teacher had told him, he really, really very funny guy, because he went over his whole history of failure. And anyone like knows me, I love talking about failures, like my own like personal failures all the time.
Life.
Yeah, exactly. And he's like, one of the lessons he got like way back when, it was like a mimetic fallacy. And the teacher was like, you know what? A mimetic fallacy is when something dull happens and you describe it dully. Right. So I was like, if it's something like, maybe you can spruce those up. And so it's really funny. I think I titled his episode that, like, not a mimetic fallacy or something. But it's sometimes if you have some vital information you need to get across, if you make it a little more interesting, then you're not kind of lulling the reader to sleep with it. So those are kind of things
that really good metaphor, shining a spotlight on it. I like that.
Yeah, me too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So is there anything you would, with someone that wants to, because a lot of people don't want to kill their darlings just in general, right? Anyone have ideas about how, so maybe things to be aware of, if you want to try to keep those things in? I try to go over like 3 little kind of hows to do it, but anything to kind of think about, be aware of, any tricks, anything you guys do in your own work?
Well, I would say, like, for a newer writer, right? Because I was definitely like that in the beginning. Just go ahead and write it all out, get it all out, and then go back, read it again, read it again,
Right.
read it again. Mm-hmm. Then eventually you will see, as a reader of your own work, that some of those things it's okay to not kill, but move, or allow to be free to go somewhere else.
Right.
Migrate your darlings.
Migrate your darlings. They're birds now.
That's what I would say.
Mm-hmm.
You want to get, like, because that's too, like, if someone had told me, when I was, when did I really start writing seriously? Like late 20s, like, said, like, no, this doesn't work. I would have gotten really defensive. Yeah. Right. Sure. So I feel like you also have to let a writer go through their process. Mm-hmm. We're at different phases, different points in time. And so I think that would be a beginning writer, just write it all out, get it all out, let it out.
Right. No,
I think that's,
yeah, no, I think that's good for almost any writer, right? I mean, you can be doing it a long time, and sometimes you get precious with your words, right? Or like, write it all out. It's you got to start somewhere. So write it all out, right? Exactly. However it feels in that time, and then rewrite and kind of figure it out, analyze it as you go. So I think that's great advice.
I tend to underwrite, on a revision or rewrite, I'm typically adding stuff to the early drafts. But I think one of the things, I work as an editor for a living. And one of the things I see with a lot of newer writers is a tendency to over-describe sometimes. That there's also the opposite tendency, but I think you need to watch it in description. This isn't the 19th century. Most readers don't want a shit ton of description. Usually a couple of general broad brush strokes and a little highlighted detail are all you need. You don't need a page to describe a location or a person. Right. Especially people. I tend not to describe my characters most of the time, or to do so very lightly. I'd rather the reader imagine them. But I think that some authors get carried away with that. So that, those could be darlings. To me, I think of darlings as just a well-turned piece of prose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it can be anything. You can get attached to anything. And I think Jessica's advice is really good. I'd add let it cool.
Mm-hmm. Amen. Yeah.
You ever write that in response to people's work? This isn't the 19th century.
No, I'm most of the time I'm more tactful if I want to be paid.
Right. You add like a RR in their name. Like, next time I give you a thing and I've blathered on too long, you'd be like, yeah, William R.R. Hincy. This isn't Lord of the Rings, bud.
I just wanted to add that when you're figuring out, your free range darlings, it's really, it sounds obvious, but it's a process that every writer goes through. You have to stop telling the story that you see with your own imagination, and you have to start telling the story that people can envision for themselves. Yeah. So sometimes we really hold certain things very close, And we're like, oh, this totally makes sense. Well, it makes sense to me. Is this really, and I have one story in particular. I keep getting the same feedback. I don't really like this ending. I don't really like I thought the ending was hilarious. And, and so I had to just really be like, all right, Gabe, this isn't working. We're reading this story. What are we going to do about it? And so you have to change things sometimes, because what is in your imagination doesn't necessarily end up on the page. And that's the challenge.
Sure.
Sorry, can you elaborate on that a little, maybe with an example or two? I that's really interesting. I'd like to hear more.
Well, I think sometimes there's a tendency to think that your life experience is something that a lot of people understand, and you can't be a writer and connect to lots of people and do that. If you're writing as a woman about a woman character and you refer to things that a guy's not going to know about, then half your readership possibly could get lost in it. So you have to set things up, and you have to tell people, show them really what is going into the story, and how it's however it fits in your head as the person creating it. You have to translate that with words to. And I think some people that are beginning get very hung up, and I encounter this as an editor too. They get very hung up on their life experience, and they're writing about something else, somebody else. One time I edited a story about a druggie, had this terrible problem, and he was hooked, and he tried to get clean, and he couldn't. And the author said something about how he left his last foster home when he was graduating high school, and he was out on his own, and then he went to college. And I'm like, did this guy really go to college? You know what I mean? Like, I could see college age. I can't see college for this guy. I mean, the writer went to college, but this character would not. So details like that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That is interesting. And I think I've noticed, it's hard to speak generally, but I've noticed that from my experience, it seems like, how do I put this? Older writing, it seems like readers were invited to do a lot more digging maybe, or like they would, you'd have this piece that would be kind of bizarre and not easily explained, but it seemed like there was this hunger to try and like really figure it out. Like, what does this person say? Like, who is this person? And it seems like that isn't as prevalent anymore. And I wonder if some of that has to do with like communication becoming very standardized. Everything is, everybody writes everything all the time now. We're always seeing words. And so that sort of, I'm trying to think of, some of the modernists, right? When I read their stuff, it's like, they didn't care. Like if, I got it or
sure.
Like, here it is, this is interesting. Right. And so you can try and figure it out. And I do. But yeah, I don't think it's good or bad. I just think it's kind of changed maybe.
Right.
So
right.
maybe
it's a good point in the I was just thinking when you're saying that conversation, it reminded me of there's a Hemingway quote about the iceberg, right? It's like you write what's sticking out of the iceberg, but there's so much more beneath it. And I think that can be the trick sometimes, is you still have to describe an iceberg. Like you still have to get the point out that that's an iceberg and not another ship or something. Right? Like you need some form to it. That's why like I tease Joyce because I really don't like him. But it's because I think I don't know I don't even know that it's an iceberg. I don't even know that I'm on the ocean. I feel like I'm so unbuoyed with it versus Hemingway, which I do really like, who I feel like I know kind of what's happening. That it's, it's usually someone that was in the war that's very sad, but I know, I know what's happening. So I like one and don't like the other. And they're kind of doing the same thing, just in wildly different ways. Although Joyce writes some short stories and things that I think are very good. But
this was interesting. His early career, he was really like accessible. Well, not really, but much more accessible. And then he just progressively became, by the end with Finnegan's Wake, he was just like, I don't care, whatever. You can do whatever you want. This is what I'm writing. Like,
feel like he was trolling. Finnegan's Wake is the biggest troll job in like writing history. I read an article, not to digress too wildly, but I read an article out here. There was a group that every week was reading, was it one chapter of Finnegan's Wake?
Oh yeah, yeah.
I think it was
years,
less.
right?
Yeah, it was like
years.
26 years. They were just finishing. And they're like, do you guys feel accomplished? And they're just like, not really.
Yeah, maybe.
I had a friend who did his thesis on Finnegan's Wake, and I can't imagine it.
Wow.
What a mind. But I guess what we've come around to is a broad definition of darlings, and, you know, tapping into Gaby's example there. It's basically anything we're attached to which might not work for others. Maybe that's a really good working definition of our darlings.
Sure. I agree. Well, and I liked too, going back to what Gaby was saying too, is there's the ego, right? Like that she was putting aside her ego, was, oh, this isn't working. How do I make this work? And I think that helps you get past the darlings, is you got to get past the, oh, this is, Jesse alluded to it earlier too. Is like, when I was younger, I'd been like, no. And I would have definitely done that when I was younger too. Hell, I might do that now. Like, what are you talking
Everyone
about?
else is
Darlings.
wrong.
Crazy. Yeah. But yeah, no, I think the getting past the ego and getting to what the story is and realizing there's a reader out there, and that may be a darling to you, it may make no sense to anyone else. So awesome. So any final thoughts before we move to the next question?
Oh, just to let you know, speaking of Finnegan's Wake and how that was a big FU to the publisher, apparently the Sex Pistols did this with The Great Rock and Roll Swindle. They made an album that is absolutely horrific, and it was basically because they had a contract and they had to do something. And once in a while, I'll be riding around with my husband, and I'll be like, "What is this horrible?" But they put it in the title, so I feel like everybody was properly warned.
Oh, very good. Very good.
Love
See,
it.
it happens. It happens. At that point, like Joyce had gotten, drunk with Hemingway so much at the bar, he was just like, "Ah, fuck all this. I, just whatever." My horrible accent, my Irish accent here. Awesome. So moving on then, round two. So like we alluded to earlier, authorial voice. So what is it? How you invoke a distinctive voice without kind of overwhelming the narrative or the characters? And do you even need to have a authorial voice? I think we mentioned the first question is, some people, subscribe to the theory of you don't want your writing to sound like writing. So you probably don't want an author voice if that's how you go. So maybe this time, I forget who we started with last time because I went out of the order of my screen. How about we go back to you, Gaby?
Okay. So I made a few notes. I got my little book here.
Very good.
Mostly, I just think it's important first, if we're going to define it, in my mind, this sounded like what the reader would picture based on how you write about a character. And I think you can do a lot with point of view, especially if you have multiple characters and you're reading through, their eyes. You're showing what they see. One person could see a priceless artifact and another person could see a dusty thing on a shelf. So I think that's one way to kind of take the author out of it and attribute judgments to the character, what they notice, how they react. And then you also can apply that to how you narrate something. If, we all have our biases and our characters will also have them too. I would be cautioning people to be aware that they could possibly come across as preachy. Some people really have a point to make. It's usually about some social or political thought. Oh, his face. Yes, I hit a nerve. Perfect. So I used to run a critique group, and I have read a lot of some of it. I'm just like, oh dear God,
Sure.
I can definitely understand how this person feels. Like, it's burdensome for the reader. Okay, we know your opinion now. Tell us a story,
Right.
Side of the fact writing this.
That's funny you have that point. That was one of the little things I jotted down too. Was that, yeah, like you may have a point, and that's fine. Writers have written with points like since the beginning of time, or I guess beginning of language. But if you need to show it through the story, you tell it comes off as that sermon. You're just gets didactic, and you're just turning people off. You're not getting the point across anymore. They're just going like, okay, well, this is another story on X, Y, or Z, and yeah.
Right. And then I would also point out, just from my experience in reading other people's work, is that when you create a point of view, when you create a character and you're showing the world through their eyes and you're showing the story through their actions, be consistent. I mean, yes, they're going to be going through an arc, a character arc. They're going to change in some way, but don't give them a Texas twang in chapter 1 and then forget book, right?
You sound like Mark Twain there. That's the kind of thing he would say, only more aggressively.
Maybe in like adjourning, island somewhere, and I could bring over George, and we could play music, and I could hear some philosophical stylings from Mark Twain.
Very good.
But yeah, that's pretty much what I had. I want people to think about that when they're writing a story. Like, hey, you set something up. We're waiting for the gun to go off.
Yeah. Right. Sure. Yeah, the Chekhov's gun. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that with the accents and the dialect and what have you. Like, I think sometimes people conflate that with like voice, and not that they're completely unrelated, but they can be really overdone. Right. Like I've read stories to where and sometimes it's not the narration. They just have the characters go into such thick accents that I just cannot figure out what they're saying. And I think the sweet spot is get a flair for it. Right. Like, what's a decent example? Not to harp on my own stuff, but I'm a narcissist, so I will. But there was a story, Bermuda Triangle, that's told all through dialogue and action tags. And the lady's British and the guy's an American guy, right? And so I wanted to show, and it's actually horrible for me to try to read it because I can't do a British accent for the life of me. So when I need to read that one out loud, I just try to give it a flair. But I think that's even writing it, if you can give it that flair. Right. And so it's kind of diction choices. Like she says, hogwash, some things that you don't normally hear a whole lot. Although where I'm from, Western Pennsylvania and West Virginia, we do say hogwash because I guess we're very British, as well. But yeah, I think those little choices, you can kind of give it a flair versus going all in and trying to really capture, this is exactly how that person sound, because it's hard to read it. Right. It might be perfectly there, but we have a hard time reading. We start cutting all these letters and things. I think you can cut some. You could probably cut every G and people would know what you're saying, But I think that can be a trap people fall into, at different times, is trying to get too far down the accent or the dialect kind of.
What was that story you wrote, William, where they were wearing, it was during the pandemic and they were wearing masks?
Oh, sure. That was hallmarked at Christmas.
Yeah, but I thought you did such a great job. I mean, speaking of just being consistent, that was the first thing I read. I'm writing about the pandemic now, but that was the first thing I read that took place during the pandemic. And I was like, wow, he's doing such a great job of just not beating you over the head with the fact that they're wearing masks, but subtly reminding you
Sure.
she had to take off her mask, or she lowered her mask, or she did it and every time you just hit that lightly, it brought it all back. It was oh, this is where they are. So yeah, kind of to your point, it's really important to be consistent like that and not to feel as though you have to beat someone over that. We'll pick up, readers are smart. We pick that up. Are. Very little cues.
Right. Yep. No, I think that's a great point. I'm glad you said that, because I think when you underestimate your reader, you do yourself a disservice. Assume they're smart. There might be one or two people that don't get it. Assume they're smart, that they're as smart as you or more. In my case, I assume they're all smarter than me. So these people got it. I don't know what I'm doing.
Never go wrong that way. Yeah.
Very good. Did you have anything else you wanted to cover, Gaby? If not, we can transition over to Daria.
Yeah, you guys tell me what you think.
Yeah, Daria, you want to jump in?
Yeah, this is this is a big and complex question with a lot of tentacles. So the first thing I would say is that a lot of people confuse, and a lot of writers who ought to know better, confuse voice with style. And some even confuse voice with tone. Voice reveals tone, tone being, the attitude that the author has to the material or the character or the issue, the conflict, whatever you like. And there are a lot of voices in some novels. There's authorial voice, which is primarily, I think, the question you were asking.
Sure.
But there's also character narrative voice, which brings in viewpoint, which Gaby was talking about, and character speaking or dialogue voice, which really is a lot more to do with diction. So there's a lot of stuff in there. I mean, there are many books written in limited third-person omniscient where you never have an authorial voice at all. It's all character voice in narrative or in dialogue. Character narrative voice being their interiority, if you like. And that has to align somewhat with the character and their diction. So, if you've got a scene written from the viewpoint of a minimally educated character who left school in 5th grade, they're not only are they not going to say, but they're not going to think he was being really obtuse. They're not going to use big words. They're not going to use. So these things have to align. I'd say that's more pronounced with the diction. And as far as diction goes, back in the 19th century, again, of course, people would try and phonetically capture regional dialogues. And we hate it these days. Nobody wants to work through a really strongly written phonetic pronunciation. You do it better, if you want to represent a regional dialogue or a foreign person's speech, you do it better through rhythm and the occasional reveal word. If you have a Russian character, you're going to drop articles a lot of the time. But as far as overwhelming the character with the authorial voice, so if you've got a book where you have authorial narrative, which I use a lot as well, which isn't omniscient, but still you can have authorial narrative in a third-person viewpoint book. And I hope I'm not getting too nerdy on this, but I have to deal with these things every day. We all have to find our own style as writers, and part of style, voice and style are related, if not the same. They're not the same thing, but they're related. So I don't know about voice overwhelming narrative, overwhelming character. Maybe if you get too flowery with it and try too hard, Sure. But as we
I think
go ahead.
Just to chime in a little,
Please.
I think there's there's the time where the author, the quote, the fictional author, quote unquote author of it, is kind of a character in the story, right? And sometimes they literally are. Yes. You have like The Great Gatsby. It's not all he's not Gatsby, right? I forget the character's name, but he tells you the whole story, and he has his point of view on the whole thing that happens, and that isn't necessarily a authorial voice because he's not truly the author, but he's the voice, like he's the voice you see everything from. So I think there's that kind of thing, and I think the author can use that, right? That's a choice that Fitzgerald made, and he's, I don't know if I don't want to say he's what is the terrible thing people do all the now, like the self-insert character that people like. I don't know that character is a self-insert, but he is inserted for the author, right? I don't know if that character is supposed to be Fitzgerald or not, but
stand-in.
Yeah, you're like a stand-in for the author. Yeah. I don't know that if it's a egotistical thing necessarily the author's doing, but the author is purposely doing that. Like, I'm telling the story through this character, and that's kind of the voice that the author's coming at it through. And then I think there's like you mentioned, you can have a third person, like now it's the most common thing, right? Is like a third person limited where you get some kind of thoughts and feelings, but mostly you're a little distance. Omniscient people don't use a whole ton anymore, but then maybe you're even, farther, not necessarily so, but maybe a little more broadly, to where you hear less of the author's thoughts on it, right? They're trying to give you the information, almost like a journalist, or something, going through it. So I guess it depends on the story you're telling, right? Like I had on a thriller writer, and we were talking about JFK, and I listened to this podcast, and he happened to have a book on it. I'm like, oh, I have to read that now, because now I'm for the next 2 weeks, I'm obsessed with the JFK assassination. Yes, it was the shiny thing I saw like at that moment, and that way, so it's like he's trying to get that story out. So there's less like author voice, and it's more kind of the story, like almost getting back to what we're talking about, like it's more cinematic almost in that way. You're just getting more of you hear the characters talk, you get some narration, so you know where everyone's going, you know what's happening, but you don't read it and get any idea what the author thinks of it, right? Versus other times you can read something and really get a sense for the author's point of view.
A lot of judgment, a lot of attitude. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dario, I'm curious, what do you think the difference between voice and style is, if there is a difference?
That's a really good question, and I'm not sure I can really answer it clearly. I think style is, let's define it as the way we use prose.
Okay.
And the way we turn our prose and us, at a syntax level, maybe.
Yeah, sure.
Voice is bigger somehow. I think style contributes to voice, but voice is somehow bigger. And I really need to think about that, because I'm not sure I have a simple answer for it. I think it's a really good question. How about you? Do you have?
Well, yeah, I think voice is hard to pin down. I feel like that kind of comes in for me at the macro level, when I go back and read it, and I can just hear it sort of consistent, because when I'm working on a page, I'm very much in that page. It's hard for me to see the forest through the trees.
That's exactly right. It's a macro level. Yep.
But I will say, I feel like you guys have touched on all the things that I agree with here. The only thing I would add is that these days, I'm very, very into style, and just weird language and weird syntax. And it's very easy for me to do that for its own sake. And so these days, which I don't want to do anymore. So these days, my first step is to try to write what I want to write as simply as possible and as straightforward as possible, so I can start to understand what I want to talk about and what the content is and what the bigger picture might be. And so that is a very important space for me. And that's the space where I feel like I'm being as honest as I possibly can. And then from there, once I have what I think is important, that's when I start to think about style, think about how I want to put these sentences together. To Gaby's point, how would, this character see this through their eyes? But I mean, I think this is kind of loosely related to the idea of voice. It's very important for me to start now these days from that place of how would you say this to a friend? How, what is the most straightforward way you could put this? Because then I can think about it, right? And I feel like I get lost in the style to begin with, then I lose touch, I lose grounding, and I lose, a sense of what the bigger picture is, what the message is. So I think, again, kind of going off on a tangent, but for me, when I think of voice, I think of starting from that very vulnerable and honest and straightforward place, that won't necessarily end up in the project, but like that becomes kind of like the skeleton or the backbone or the basis of the project. So that's where voice starts for me these days, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. That's very well put.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of it a lot of times as like, it's almost like the essence of it. There's a breath, right? There's when you're writing something, at some point you're giving something of yourself to it. I think all writers do, right? No matter what, I think we're giving something of ourselves to what we're writing. I think some writers more than others. Right. I've made I don't want to belabor the point, but I tend to think of it like bleeding, right? That, some writers really bleed for what they're writing, really have, they've really put themselves into it. And other people are a little more standoffish, with it, but it's still getting something of them. And I tend to think of the author's voice as that primal thing, that raw thing that's infused in there. Whether you want it or not, versus style can be, it's what point of view you've chosen, the syntax, the diction. I mean, diction's with everything, though. I mean, of course, we're writing, right? So diction's as far as into everything, but how poetic is the writing? Right. I think that's kind of, so you can have writing that's very straightforward, and that writing that you don't feel like it's writing. You have other writing that's more the poetic side, down to poetry. But even, Jesse, the stuff I've read of yours to where it's very infused. I mean, it's prose poetry essentially. And that's the spectrum, and that's all okay. And all of that might be voice, and the voice is infused in all of that, but a lot of that is more just the style you're writing in. And I think a lot of times the voice comes out in how the author actually feels about everything. And I don't always think that, as much as we may try to take ourselves out of it, we do feel some way. And that discernment, all of the judgment calls we make along the way, it's going to come out. And you're gonna feel it.
Choices. You choose to go from this to this to this, and those choices somehow, reveal who you actually are behind the scenes. It's it's just very strange. I think it's hard to define voice, but it's there. We can all sense it for sure. Like you have an ear for prose. That's a great expression, because it's true. Because you listen and you can hear the voice, and then the voice creates this sort of identity.
Sure.
Of the author, even behind the story.
To me, one of the things, I mean, to me, voice goes a huge way towards carrying a story. A good voice is impossible to ignore, and it started with Homer. And it'll carry a story through some.
Are we talking Simpson?
Yep, exactly.
A strong or well-rounded voice will carry a story through some heavy going, through some flat spots, even, through some slow parts. It's really, to me, it's really underappreciated and a huge component of successful fiction. And people have said to me, how do I know voice, or what is it? You know it when you hear it. You know it because the author might be talking about how a shoe factory works, but you can't stop reading.
Sure.
Right. Yeah.
And that's voice. That's a good voice.
Right.
Agreed.
How do you foster a voice? Right. So if there's someone out there, new or old, I mean, I always think of it like no matter where you are, right, you're trying to grow. I'm always just trying to be the best me I can be, right, the best writer I can be. And I don't know that one of the things I love about art in general is that you don't have a peak, right? Like I love sports, but you're 38 and you're, now they're like, who are we drafting to replace you, right? I mean, before 38 most of the time. You hit 30 and it's like you're hitting the end of the road here. Versus, writing the things, there's no reason like you have to peak at some age. You can peak at, different ages. I mean, you could peak at 25 and not get any better, and or you could peak at 65, right? I mean, but how do you foster that voice? Like, how do you not? And I don't mean technically necessarily, although if anyone wants to take it there, that's okay. I mean, how, like, when I have this story I want to write, how do I foster in me as a writer that when I write stories, I have a voice, or
I think you need to care. It kind of comes down to passion. You need to give a damn about what you're saying and the story you're telling. And that'll, and that will come through. It's mysterious, but I think that will be my bottom line off the cuff.
Right. Gaby, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, sorry, I had a little coughing fit. I did my best to mute it.
Oh, no worries. You did a great job muting it. I had no idea.
I think it really, if you can find a way to use real experience behind what you write. I mean, the setting can be anything, but the human emotion. I watched, this isn't normal for me. I'm risking my punk rock reputation right now, but I watched Eras by Taylor Swift the other night. I'm getting over a cold and I'm pretty much zoning out. I did a puzzle and listened to her sing for 3 hours. And she's been doing this for 17 years. And there is a very big change in what she wrote when she was a teenager and what she wrote as a young woman, or even approaching middle age now. And some of it was hilarious. Some of it made me wish that I was born after her so that I could grow up listening to these songs and have better insights into the dating world. Honest to God. Yeah. So I think, the only point I would really make, and that was kind of a clumsy example, but I would definitely say real experience and understanding a problem and being able to demonstrate that in the story. It goes a long way.
Sure.
Yeah, they answered for me. I think both of what the both things they said at the same time. You have to care, you have to have passion. And these days I'm discovering too, especially what Gaby's saying, is like, what's the problem? What's my life? What have I seen? Everything, like, what is my political view on this? What is, just understanding yourself and understanding like where you're coming from, I think, before you start creating these stories is so important, and it will come through without being preachy, because you still have to, employ all the techniques we're talking about, right? Like seeing to the character's eyes, being consistent, etc. But at the foundation, I agree 100% with Gaby and the lovely Daria.
Sure. Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's the other part of it, because we had mentioned like getting preachy and things, even earlier. But I think you have to have passion. You have to have like some life experience. You have to be willing to put yourself into what you're writing, not as a self-insert, but just to put something of yourself into what you're writing. But I think you also need to have a worldview, and you have to have a unique worldview. And I don't mean a wild, like, oh, I think the world's two-dimensional. Like, it doesn't need to be some wild like thing. It needs to be unique, as in it's personal to you. So you have to move past ideology, past here's my political team, past here's my religious team. You have to actually have a view of the world that encompasses all of those things, but that is real to you, that you've thought through. Because if it's just here's my ideology and I think this, and now I'm gonna, like, that's when you end up preaching that, because you don't have, when you come to those choices in the story that may, that's per that character, per what's happening, you don't have a place to come to it besides a stock place, right? And you don't have a voice if you're coming from kind of a stock philosophy or something that's coming at you. So I think a lot. I'd love to listen to. I listen to so much kooky things. The last person I recorded the show wrote a book on Bigfoot, and we talked Bigfoot for like 3 hours. I loved every second of talking to Bigfoot. But then I'll listen to people talk about, whatever. It could be the newest, political thing out there, whatever. But I think when you open your mind to everything and then kind of form that worldview, it's bound to come out. But you have to really be willing to kind of put yourself out there and be open to thoughts, so that then when you think through them through the story, it comes out kind of naturally. I think authorial voice is really hard to fake. I think that's what we've kind of gotten to. It's very nebulous. It's very hard to put into a box. But I think that's because it has to actually be coming from a real place. And you got to foster that real place. And
I think just adding on to that, I think to me, that's what's so beautiful about being a writer is like, it's a life of rejection. It's a life of like thankless effort. There's very little money. We all know this. But what's so great about it is that like the more open I am to my experience, the more I'm present, the more I'm thinking about my relationships and like really living life richly, the better of a writer I'm becoming, right? So it's like it goes hand in hand. I get to live this like incredibly rich life because of that, right? If I don't do that, then I have nothing to offer. I didn't realize that until I started getting older, but now it's like, I write in the morning and then I go out and like, it's great. I can't wait to just like soak it all up like a sponge, look at this situation, look at this character, look at, it's almost subconscious too. I'm just constantly like taking notes in the back of my mind. How cool is that? You get to live like, it's awesome.
Yeah, it is. Amen.
But yeah, and I think I may have told you this before, when I was younger and living in LA and I was first starting to get into writing, through a writing workshop, I was taken out with a famous author at that time. It was like my early 20s. And I think I asked her like, what, do you have any advice like for writers? And she's like, don't start writing until you're 30. Like at the time I was like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. What are you talking about? I didn't say that, obviously. But she's 100% right. It's like you get older and you change. And so you develop and you become more aware and self-aware, you develop this worldview. Then you really start having something to offer, I think.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. So round 3. So, I like to get into something like writing life, pop culture, something like that. So I thought a fun conversation then today would be the professionalization of your writing career versus treating it more like a hobby. So for each of you, do you treat your writing as a profession or like a hobby? What are their pros and cons, each approach? And then I think we've kind of started, I think we're back to you, Dario, if you want to take us.
Yeah. Gosh, you ask some good questions, Bill.
That's why I host the show. Yeah,
you could do well at this. You're good. I'm kind of with Stephen King when he talks about approaching it with deadly seriousness. I think you better approach it as a professional. That said, of course, you need to be playful as well, but we'll come to that. But I think unless you're going to try and really be serious about writing well and giving it your best, which to me is what a professional does, then you shouldn't be doing it. That said, I'm not sure I could ever see it as a hobby. I'll be honest, I have, although I did used to, I have no illusions about ever making a living as a writer, and some people would define professionalism as being a full-time writer and making a living through it. We all know how incredibly hard and rare that is. So I would caution people against seeing professionalism as being a full-time writer who lives from their writing. Maybe if you take it seriously enough in the first place and approach it as a professional, maybe you'll get there. But hobby sounds kind of, I think you need playfulness, but I'm not, even a certain innocence, but hobby, I'm not sure I like that word. It sounds like you're not giving it a real good,
would you
sincere
put
shot.
when I was thinking of the question, I was thinking more like, and so this is why I'm asking this, if there's a different word you would put in place of hobbyism versus professionalism. So in the sense that, like, I have lots of friends that love golf, right? I liked it when I was younger, right? But they'll spend tons of time golfing. They will spend tons of money golfing. Then they will be really trying to get better all the time. But they also don't think that at some point they're going to be on the PGA Tour. Right. So it is their hobby, but you can be very passionate about a hobby and take it very seriously without, minimalizing what that means. Right. So I don't know if there's a different word you would like to insert in there. That's when I was framing the question. That's kind of what I was thinking.
No, you're absolutely right. And thank you for defining that, because that's absolutely true. I mean, I've had hobbies I've taken very seriously. So yeah. I think you nailed it. But I think professionalism is important to me. I like to, if I'm going to do something, I want to give it my best shot. I don't do things in a half-assed way. I'd rather not do them all. But I'm old and I've gone through that learning process. I've done my days of approaching things in a half-assed way.
So you're saying there's hope for me. There may be some point where I'm not half-assing everything.
Yeah, another couple of decades. I think you have to give writing your best, absolute best, and hobby. Yeah, in the way you defined it, yes, sure. Why not?
Sure. So maybe then you want to take it from there, Jesse?
I agree 100% with Dario. I obviously take it very seriously. Hobby, but I mean, it's hard to, I don't know how to define professionalism. Sometimes I submit my work to magazines, or I'm working on a novella or reworking a novella which I want to perhaps have published traditionally. I mean, and that scene is brutal, or at least it's been brutal to me.
Oh, it's terrible.
It definitely makes you feel like you're not a professional, right? Like,
so
that way,
I'm sorry, Jesse, maybe let me phrase the question here slightly differently just for the conversation. So taking aside what I just said about hobbyism, I don't want to act like neither one takes it seriously. I think it's more like professionalism, as in, like, I want to make this my career and make as much money as absolutely possible, versus you can love it both ways, right? But versus this is something I love to do, and I absolutely take golf seriously. I absolutely take writing, in this case, seriously, whatever that hobby is. So both cases, you take them seriously, but one case you're really trying to monetize it, versus the other where hopefully it makes you money, right? I don't think anyone doesn't want to make money, right? But to where it's not something that it's not your career, like you're happy being a teacher.
So do you see writing as a career choice or yeah?
I think I go back and forth. I mean, honestly, I think I aspire to just have it be a hobby. I would love to just be, the person who's like, I just do this because I love it and that's it. Like, but I'm not. There's also a part of me that wants to be read and wants to get my work out there. And so then I engage with the jungle, as it were. Like, I would love to just be that guy who's just like, doesn't care. I mean, cares about his work, but doesn't care about anything beyond that. So I think I go back and forth. I have periods where I submit stuff. I have periods where I don't. I think it's just, a lot of like emotional back and forth. It's I think for me, it's tough to be a writer in that sense, especially because we live in this culture where, you're really defined by what you do, right? I've spent time with a lot of writers who are doing well, and that is a scene unto itself, right? I would say that's very much like, that very much parallels like a career situation, right?
Sure.
Do I fit in there? Maybe not, but also, of course, I want to be read. So I think I go back and forth, and I think I would love to just have it be a hobby, but also I think I also, want to go somewhere with it eventually, hopefully, and be read and be recognized. So yeah, I would just say that's a tough question. And I think hobbyism is the way that, like, this seems like the best way to me, but am I there? No, not 100%, if that makes sense.
Sure. No, fair enough. Gaby, you want to take it from there?
Sure. Okay, so I'll start with the cons. They're they're converse of each other. If you want to make book writing and similar types of things your career, you can have your joy robbed from you because you have to take it so seriously. You're also got to always be thinking about money. And on the other side, are you taking it seriously enough?
Sure.
Because, I mean, a lot of people pursue different things and they want to get better at them. And that's what this is all about. I mean, that's how every writer starts. It's how anything starts. The first thing I thought of when you used the word professionalism was, if you do self-publish, please get a copy edit.
I'm glad you had that on the show.
And you get 2 editors right here. You reach out.
I will do it for free if you're my friend, and I don't want your book to go out in the world like that. I have bought like acquaintances' books and been like, oh my God, and then also a few little basics: no timeline jumping and don't leave holes in your story. So when you said the word professionalism, I went back into editor mode.
Right, sure.
Like, if you're looking at it as a pursuit that may turn into something, it does take the pressure off of you to make money and make financial success, which I think is going to yield your better creative work. And there's a quote from David Bowie about never play to the gallery. You're supposed to make the art that you need to make. You're not supposed to look around and see what's popular. I had a minute.
I'm so with you.
Yeah, I was like, I should write romance novels. Everybody buys them. You know what? I can't write a romance novel. I'm terrible.
Right, sure.
Never write to the market. I agree. A lot of people wouldn't agree with us on that, but yeah, I'm right with you, Gaby.
Yeah, I mean, you want to do your best work, and if you're gonna connect to better paying work in the future, you need to do your best work now. And so if you're going to do your best work now, you're going to like what you're doing. And so also when you take the desperation of trying to make money out of the equation, it does give you the freedom that you wouldn't have with a client. You're not writing so that someone else will love it. I mean, you are, but you aren't. You're writing from your core. So those are my thoughts.
No, thank you for that. Yeah. I loved what you said about that, because a lot resonated with me. But one of them is, when you professionalize things, you have to have a market, right? And so one of the really hard things, and I mean, Jesse, you alluded to it, is that not even alluded, just plain stated it. When you want to try to traditionally publish, they want to know what bucket you fit into, right? You're going to go on this rack, on this bookshelf, and then we can compare you to this writer very easily. That might be okay, but you know what? Like, Star Wars came out, there wasn't a lot of fantasies set in space as it is, right? It's really a fantasy story set in space. It's Harry Potter, right? Like, those things that really truly like blow up usually aren't the just standard romance novel.
So true.
And so you can, in the sake of trying to monetize everything, professionalize everything you're doing, get all that stress. And that's one of the ones I always feel bad, because then you'll see, like, and I spend 30 minutes on social media a week, maybe. I try to post some stuff for the show. I just have such little patience for being on there at all. But the quick little scan, I'm on there when I post something and try to scan for like if you guys have posted anything or just, you know what I mean? Like I usually just try to see like, is there anyone I can support real quick while I'm here? You'll see people miserable, like, oh, I didn't sell anything this week. And it can be a very stressful place, you know, trying to make a career of it. It is hard. And the reality is that you can, but you also need to think about, is there multiple streams of money you can make here, right? Can like you and Dario have done is, can you edit, make some money that way? Can you, we're trying to do with this show is, can I start getting this show out on the road and start this show make a little bit of money? But I never look at it as I need to make money off the show. I look at this as a labor of fun. But if I need to, like, at some point get rid of my career, the show needs to make me a little money for me to be able to spend the crazy amounts of time I spend recording, editing, and finding new guests and everything else, like, you know, I do for it. And then there's the, you know, the writing. So I think you really have to be honest with what you want. Like, I think the questions to ask yourself, right, if you want to professionalize or not, are, why are you writing?
Yes.
Right. Are you writing because you love it and you want to share it? I think everyone wants to share it. I think that's okay. Like, you obviously want to share it, but is it something that you're just so compelled to do that it affects your day and you just have to get it out? And there's a billion stories and you feel like you'll never get to them all if you don't, right? Do you like your current career? Right? Because if you're, you know, your teacher, you're a fireman, whatever it might be, you may really love what you're doing. You may love your lifestyle. How much do you feel about that? Because if you try to transition, that could be a hard transition, right? Like, luckily my wife makes a decent living. I made a decent living. We got into our house at a great time, but it's a hard transition to like transition over. So you need to kind of know, why are you doing it? How do you feel about your career? Is it something you can do passionately, be very serious about, but you still want to have this job, this security of kids? Right? I've stuck in the corporate world for a long time because I have 4 kids, you know, and it's nice to make sure that the mortgage is paid and kids are fed, you know. And then like, what are you willing to sacrifice? Mm-hmm. So, because even like, and I've had, you know, the really, besides the fact that I just have a blast doing this show, like the open bars, like the main show and things, getting a chance to like talk and like really get to meet everyone. And my secret, like the whole secret to like the mild success I've had, is that I look at it as just a chance to like have a human connection with someone, like every episode. Like, I don't look at it like, oh, I'm trying to do this thing. Like, I'm just like, oh, I just want to like have a human connection. I hope people pick up on that. Because it's, for one, it's awesome for me. It's like to make all these friends, and we have open bar. Part of the reason I like to do this is like, oh, like, you know, me and Gaby haven't talked since December, you know, like, you know, and Jesse, when we thought, like, I get a chance to like, you know, connect with everyone again. But what are you willing to sacrifice to do it? Because it can be a lonely place to start, you know, and even some of the best sellers I've had on the show and things now that make a living off of it. One of them, SJ Roseanne, was on the show. She was really funny. She's in Manhattan, and she like, so here I am. So like, we were talking about her transition. She was an architect and she transitioned to writing full time. And she's like, oh, look, so this is my office. Behind me, you see my kitchen. There's one more room. That's my bedroom. This is it. This is what I got. She's also in Manhattan, right? But it's like, this is what I've got. So you're sacrificing something. She had a posh like architecture job doing, very funnily enough, I think she said it was like police station, firehouses, and zoos was the main things like they did. But it was a transition, and like, you know, how you do it. So I think if you ask yourself those questions on, do you want to make this profession versus something that is more in that hobby vein? I don't belittle hobby. I think hobbies are very important. I think, and you can be really passionate about them. I don't think there's anything. Not only do I not think there's anything wrong with hobbies, I think there's everything right with them.
Oh yeah.
And so it's, do you want to go that route to where this becomes the thing you have to make money on? Or do you want to go that route? And I think those are 3 kind of questions. There's probably more. But I think if you ask yourself those, you can probably get to a fair answer. I think you can get to somewhere place where you can really go, okay, this is really what I'm going to do. I want to, because not to belabor past guests, but I had John Gilstrap on, and he's done a bunch. He's a thriller writer. He's done a bunch of New York Times, USA Today bestsellers. It's very funny, actually. We talked about this a little too. Is he's had like 3 or 4 books optioned to be made into films, and none of them have been made into films yet. And this is
classic.
And so his first book and his second book went bestseller and got optioned. And I think he says it on the show, and I'll try to link him up here. It'll definitely be after, because I think he's going to be August 2024. But he makes like $1 million doing this, and so he quits his job. He actually kind of owned a company. He ends up selling the company to like the employees. It was like a small firm, and he didn't like it. It was like he likes being around people, right? And it was like writing was very lonely. He ended up getting another day job, being a director of like safety.
Wow.
And did that. And now he's a little older. He's retired now. He's actually going to do a few of these open bars, coming up. But so there's writing can be lonely, too. So it's like there's real things you have to like think to yourself, like, what is that life really like? Are you willing to sacrifice having that pack? Because when they closed my factory, I still work for the company like part-time now. But the hardest thing for me, and this was prior to COVID, was when they closed my factory, is I kind of lost that pack. And I have 4 kids, a wife. And like 2 of the kids are still here. At that time, my daughter and granddaughter were still here. That community, and having a community pushing towards kind of the same thing, it can be hard. It can be hard to do it. So just my thoughts on like, the general progress of where you want to go with it.
I think I agree with all that. And I think that those are great, like practical questions. I think for me, it's more of just, it's years of conditioning, right? I come from a family where, it's all my siblings have pretty standard careers. And, I was taught very early on that this is, kind of the path you should take, or the general path you should take. And I'm now doing the polar opposite of that, right? So I think emotionally, 100%, like classic, like almost cliche. So I think it's been an emotional struggle for me, especially when I first started. So I started trying to get serious about publishing maybe 2 years ago. I had a few mild successes, which was great, a lot of rejection, but it's been, just the emotional part of it. It's like, this has to fit into a box, right? I was taught that this has to be, if you're going to be professional, you have to be successful. And successful means publication. And so that's just this struggle that is really actually, like Gaby said, it's, taking away from the creativity and the freedom. So I think basically I'm saying this because I agree with all the practical things you're saying, but I think probably for a lot of writers, there's also that whole emotional component, right? Because it's like, if you get the deal, or if you get the whatever it is, like, then that's almost like a validation or an acknowledgement that, oh yeah, you are a professional, which is silly because you can't control that. Right.
Right. Well, it's ego. Right.
Yeah.
And I say ego, not necessarily like it's a bad thing, because we all have one. I joke about mine all the time. I overinflate mine. I don't have as much of an ego as I like to like pretend, but there is, right? So like I remember like when I first started, like I really wanted to win an award.
Sure,
right?
sure.
Like I really want award-winning author on there, right? And then so I win one. Oh, okay. I really want to win too, And so then it's like, I actually won it's like a regional award, Southwestern regional, some award, a Fire for Christmas, won like last week. And I haven't even posted about it yet. I keep forgetting. I'm like, oh, I should probably do something. I'm like, whatever. Like it's
well done. That's not your first one either.
No.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Well deserved.
Yeah. No, thank you. But there's the ego pursuit of it. And I'm not actually trying to discourage anyone. Like I trying to professionalize all of this. But I think if you're honest with yourself on why you're doing it, I think that's kind of the important part, right? Like the real reason, like I feel so compelled to do it is that like I have so many stories I want to tell, and
Exactly.
I wanted to go so far with them. You know, like I've been working on Pirates of Appalachia, which I know Dario and Jesse we talked about, I think at different times. And I just finished, you know, quote unquote. But I have so much things like that I want to do that if I don't professionalize it, I'll never get to half of them. I'll probably never get to all of them anyways, which I'm very comfortable with. I'd rather have more ideas than less. But there is that certain point like, no, I have all of this that I'm truly compelled to do. But versus, is it just an ego thing, right? I would be careful with, is it just a vanity project? Right.
I think it's a matter of like, to me, like coming back to that truth, like dealing with all these messages, these cultural messages and messages for your up every day, but being able to keep coming back to, wait, okay, I set out to do this because this is why I, like, and so I think that's the back and forth and the tug of war that I'm constant. It's like it's being able to, and it's not like you have a whole bunch of people around you who are like, oh yeah, no, wait, this is why you're doing it. It's more like, what are you doing? Like, you have to,
like, how are you going to monetize that, right? Are you going to get a real job? Like that's the hard part, right? The cultural thing. Yeah.
Gaby's been wanting to say something for ages, but she's too polite to interrupt. I kept seeing her hand up. And then I'm going to interrupt her. But
okay, cool. So I got 3 men on the line here. I'm going to tell you my lingerie story. So
very good.
I used to work for Victoria's Secret when I was a young lady. And I did. I worked at the mall. I used to be able to like look at a bra and tell you if it was a 34C or a 38D. I folded them all day long and I'd help people and stuff. Anyway, one of my managers was very obsessed with sales. And she would take me aside every day and tell me how many times I'd sold something. The other manager was cool. And we just hang out and talk and whatever. By not focusing on how much I was selling, I sold more.
Yeah.
So when you think about how are you doing this writer's career, like if you obsess over it, you are not bringing in good energy. And so like, as I'm hearing you all talking, I'm thinking about, I just reread this book called Ask and It Is Given. And it's kind of a refresher on the law of attraction and what am I putting out there and what am I getting back and what thoughts are plaguing me and what thoughts are uplifting me, right? And you really have to, celebrate every win. And in addition to that, you really have to stop the hyper focusing on anything. Like right now, 2 of my journals are discounted to like $3.50, and Amazon did that. I didn't do that. But I'm trying to sell them anyway because I'm like, well, it's a deal.
Right.
Like you gotta take your wins where you can get them. So, and I've been posting about it and I haven't looked. I don't know if anybody's bought them yet. And it
yeah, nice.
Yeah, Dario, you said you wanted to break in if you want to take it from there.
That's the truth, by the way. Yeah, don't hyper-focus on it. No, Bill, you kind of touched on it a moment ago anyway about it not being a real job, right? It's not being a real job. So I've lived in well, I'm English, obviously, but I've lived in Greece and I've spent a lot of time in Italy, and writers are regarded very differently in the rest of the world. For some reason, writing as a profession is very devalued in the Anglophone countries. You tell someone you're a writer in Greece and they respect you. You get an instant respect, and the same in Italy, the same in a lot of other countries. The reason perhaps I reacted a little to the word hobby is because in a recent conversation with a friend who's written a couple of very good books. She had said to me, I can't, I'll try and quote it fairly accurately. When she'd actually committed to writing as a full-time thing, not necessarily as a view to making a living, because she didn't need to make a living out of it, but to give it her best. And she told someone she was a writer when they asked what she did. They said, well, something like, when are you going to get a real job? You know, and that's very common. Or, you know, how's your hobby going?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really what we do is really undervalued in, for some reason, America and England, much more than it is in the rest of the world. You know, where you're seen as someone who actually thinks about things and tries to understand people and the way the world works and a shit ton of other things. So that's perhaps why the word hobby kind of triggered me a little.
I needed a trigger warning. I'm sorry.
I'm so wounded.
Yeah, it's true. It's a lot of, you know, there isn't a lot of encouragement really, which is tough. You know, and I think in some ways I feel like that's why I know I'm a writer, because like notwithstanding all the like lack of encouragement and like I still just have to write.
Right.
Wake up and I'm like, well, I still have to do this.
Right.
Like,
that's the best reason to write, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the best reason to write, Jesse.
Yeah, amen. I mean, I always think that's the thing, is that you know, it's like I've changed a little over the years. My wife used to joke with me, because she'd be like, why don't you tell anyone you're a writer? Because if people would ask, I would tell them anything besides. And I'm like, for one, this person doesn't read anything. So unless I'm Stephen King or J.K. Rowling, he doesn't know. He doesn't know any other writers. So he doesn't know anything I've written. And not that I'm that big anyways, but I'm like, not going to know. And two, it's just a segue for that person to then tell me the great story they have, or why their life, I should write their memoir for them. Right. Like, so, so I would just dread it, because I don't need to hear any of it. I don't want this conversation. I want to hear about the great book that you're, you know, maybe or may not write. You know, like, you just go write it. You have no interest in what I have to say. It's about you. So, but I think
you need to write something.
Right. Yeah. So, but I think that's the thing, is like, are you compelled to do it? Then be compelled to do it. And I think, what I tend to think of it is one is if you look at it, and I'm not trying to expound one view versus the other. I just pros and cons of it, right? Just hypotheticals going through. Like I've already said, I'm trying to professionalize it, have to some degree. But I think if you truly look at it more like it's your passion project, right? Taking the hobby word out of it, this is my passion project. Well, there's a little less stress in that regard than I need to be on social media for 4 hours today, right? Because what I learned very quickly about social media is I never liked it, but then also it's just a complete time drain. And the idea that now I can spend 4 hours on social media and write the things I want to write and write them to the quality I want to write them, there's just a time balance. Like, that's not going to happen. Like, I guess I would never live. But like we talked about earlier, like, are you going to be a great writer if you don't live? You're not. So I was like, you need to be able to live and be a person. You need to be able to write. You need to spend time with your family. And you can spend odd hours like beating the algorithm and just posting on Twitter constantly and replying to everyone and reposting every meme you've seen, right? Like, it can be a trap. So I think when you go the passion project route, then you kind of keep in focus what you really care about. It may be a little better. But if you do want to go and I want to write the next, the great thriller, I want to write romance, that's fine. Just keep in mind what you're doing, right? You might be sacrificing, right? What are you willing to sacrifice? In that route, you might be sacrificing the story you really want to tell, the things you may really have to say, for the sake of commerce. And if you want to do that, that's fine. We all sacrifice things to have a roof over our head. So that's human experience, right? You sacrifice things to go kill the woolly mammoth or to go pick the berries, right? Like it's all trade-off. So, anywho, so anything else before we put a bow on it? Anyone else want to chime in?
I just want to say that, from going from a down note to a positive one, these things are wonderful. Another thing I love about being a writer is meeting other writers and
Yes.
editors. That gives me encouragement. That gives me hope. And reminds me that even though this is kind of an isolating path, I still am part of a community. Like we're all
Absolutely
doing this, and that's really nice. This has been really, really uplifting. So thank you.
For me too. And, I have a saying, writers need writers, because we get one another.
Yeah.
We get it, and you need to connect with other writers, because God knows a lot of people don't get it.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't get why it's important.
Exactly.
So absolutely yes on that. And thank you, Bill, for the opportunity to do that.
Thank you, buddy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's part of the reason, like, I'm thank you, Jess, for bringing that up, is that part of the reason I get excited about these open bar episodes was that. It was like, okay, I want to build a community out of this. Well, community needs more than just one-on-one. I think absolutely needs to happen. We need to have one-on-one conversations, but then it's also just get everyone together, talk about things, talk about writing things. I can actually be, and Daria knows this very well from us hanging out. I usually have like a 10-minute max on writing things, and then I'm going to talk Bigfoots or something, right? Like I'm just like, we're going to go talk about other things. But it's that space just to talk about those things and just be open, like, and be willing to disagree and be willing to talk pros and cons, like just, whatever. Like it's just all what we're thinking, all what we're feeling. Like there's no right or wrong all the time with it. And that was the other portion, is every time I see little things on writing, it's people dictate as if from Mount High and they have their tablets. And really it's about what works for you. Right. It always is. I like the first one's almost always writing rules now because of that. It's what works for you. There's obviously nuance. And if you get 4 people together, you get 4 writers together, you'll get 3 to 4 different, opinions on it. You'll get a bunch of nuance. And then anyone watching this can then take away from it and go, okay, well, this is what I think. Right. And maybe it's going to be a 5th thing. And that's okay. So anyway, thank you so much, guys, for joining today. Any parting thoughts before we go?
Just thank you. Gratitude for you guys. Honestly,
same.
Good work.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you to all of you for hanging out with me, and also just a reminder to take all your wins wherever you can get them.
Amen. That's the other thing. It's like
be
grateful. Yeah, it's true. It's hard. It's so easy to take things for granted. I remember when I first got published, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, no one's the next one. It's like, you got to really take, you have to really appreciate every little thing that comes your way. I fully believe that.
In the 15 minutes before I came on here, I got a text, and I'm learning how to be a grant writer. And you pretty much have to do an application for this particular organization to even do an application. Do a grant, you have to ask first, and they have to look your first ask and say it's good enough. And we got the news, it's good enough.
Yay.
It's so exciting. And I'm not getting paid, but I don't care, because I'm so excited to be able to help people. And so, right, and it's like I run in the house and I'm like, Bobby, and but then like it's on to the next task, right? You have that moment, and then you're like, okay, well, now I got to get to work. But you have to just take all your wins.
Absolutely.
Amen.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, guys.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
No problem. And thanks so much, Gabby, for sticking through. Like, I know you weren't feeling well, so
steroids are amazing.
In sickness and in health.
Final round. Question for the audience. Thanks so much for sticking with us. It was a great show. Now a question for you. What's a writing rule that you consider gospel? Tell me in the comment section down there. I'll be sure to read it, give you a reply, and have a great day. Cheers.